project was on keyloggers. What is keylogging? Keylogging is, by definition, just the recording of keystrokes on a keyboard. Normally using either some sort of software or hardware. Why should we care about keylogging? Keylogging has many benefits as well as security concerns that many people don't really think about. To start off, we'll talk about a little about the history of keylogging. It started off in the mid-1970s. Soviets in Soviet Russia were bugging IBM Selectric 2 and 3 typewriters at the U.S. embassies. The U.S. was first notified about the keyloggers by the French, who had found similar ones in some of their typewriters, and then it really came to light once the Americans found it. The first software keylogger was invented for the Unix operating system in 1983 by a guy named Perry Kerfoloferitz. So the first type of hardware, implementation of keyloggers is firmware. Firmware keylogger is installed on the BIOS, or rightly the firmware of the computer or the device. It is one of the hardest types of keyloggers to identify because it hides below the operating system, so any software rootkit detection software that you have installed won't be able to find it. One of the biggest hardware firmware keyloggers that came out recently was Apple keyboards allowed a modification to firmware because they didn't lock down the firmware on the keyboard itself. So it allowed anyone with access to the keyboard to download modified firmware and essentially gives someone complete control over that machine. The second type of hardware implementation of keyloggers is just the keyboard itself acts as the keylogger. Or there's also a inline keylogger that you plug the USB cord coming from the keyboard itself into the computer. You just plug it in there and then it logs any data that runs through that cable. Then you have keyboard sniffers, which capture data packets sent from wireless keyboards. This allows you to pull any keys that are typed while traveling wirelessly from the keyboard to the computer. Almost every major brand of keyboard nowadays encrypts wireless keyboard traffic, so you would have to have a way to decrypt that. Then there is also a tool that you can use to emulate keyboard transmissions using wireless mice. It's not exactly keylogging because it's using modified packets to control a computer through a wireless mouse, but I just threw it in here for fun because it was a neat little thing that I found while researching wireless keyboard. So then there's different software implementations of keyloggers. So you have the hypervisor / rootkit, The most notable example of this was the blue pill. It runs on a virtual machine underneath the operating system. So again, the operating system itself and any software installed on it will not be able to capture or not be able to identify the keylogger. When it first came out, the creator specifically said that it was undetectable, but that's been refuted by multiple sources since then. It was debuted in at the Black Hat in 2006. It uses the virtualization of AMD and Intel processors to run kind of hidden in quotes from any known method. And you have the kernel. Kernel keyloggers obtain root access to the system. Again, it is one of the hardest to detect because it runs as a root on the system. This means that it has full control behind the operating system and it can do whatever it wants. The kernel rootkit or the kernel keylogger has become synonymous with rootkits. The next type of keylogger is an API. This uses the application program interfaces that are on the operating system itself. Just for example, in Windows, get async key state and get foreground window are the two APIs that are most commonly used to sniff or pull the keys that are being typed on the keyboard. You're then able to hook both of these into existing applications, and because then they are now assumed part of an application, most malware detection won't pick up on them. Next is form grabbing. It's not entirely keylogging per se, but it does capture what is typed inside of a form on a web application. This is commonly used in man-in-the-middle attacks on websites where you have a form, the website is hacked, and so all form data gets redirected to a third party and then gets redirected back and then submitted. So it looks like it's submitted perfectly fine, but in reality, a third party has gotten any data that was typed into that web application. And then you have high-level programming and scripting. This uses languages like JavaScript, PowerShell, C++. They're the simplest keyloggers to write and implement. And JavaScript and PHP are two of the bigger ones for form grabbing. Here I have just a small example of a PowerShell keylogger that was I actually found online and then kind of just modified a little bit so that it's cleaned up a little nicer and it's easier to read. So here you have all the different API calls that we're going to get. So you get the async key state right here. Here you get the keyboard state. Basically, these are just the things that allow you to capture each individual keystroke. And then we will use those later on down here to actually bind to that and then store that in a file. So here you're able to get the current state of the ASCII keyboard layout. when a keyboard is pressed, it maps it to the virtual key here, and then down here it receives that key, it adds it to a string, and then it appends that to a file that is then stored on the local computer, but it could be sent somewhere else if you had set it up to be. This is just the most basic keylogging program that you can have. It doesn't run in the background or anything. Well, it runs in the background, but it doesn't run hidden. Now we'll go over a couple ways that you can protect yourself from keyloggers. First up, we're going to look at how to protect yourself from some hardware keyloggers. First of all, if you can lock down all the USB ports on the computer, or at least lock the computer down so that the back keyboard or the back USB ports aren't accessible, the ones that aren't checked as often. Get rid of wireless keyboards, as wireless keyboards are able to have the information pulled wirelessly. So wired is your friend there, as well as block the use of flash drives where possible. Use encrypted flash drives, just so that no one can put any data on your computer that you don't want. Keyloggers can be hidden inside of flash drives, and then they get installed when you plug in the flash drive. We have software keylogger protections. Most keyloggers are installed during the download of a program on the internet, so make sure you're only downloading from trusted sources. Don't click on ads. Always make sure you run malware and virus scans. A lot of malware and virus scanners nowadays also check for rootkits. I believe Windows Defender does. Malwarebytes does, I know for sure. And I believe Kaspersky has a free security scan for rootkits. And then, just to make sure you don't have any form grabbing going on, check the secure lock in the URL browser when submitting sensitive information. Those URL locks can be forged, but I mean, there's only so much you can do over the internet. We have Windows telemetry. Windows has gotten a lot of flack over the past 6 years or so. Ever since Windows 10 came out, it became a big thing again. There's a lot of association with Windows 10 and their built-in keylogger. According to all sources I could find, everything you type sent on your computer is sent to Microsoft servers every 30 minutes if your computer has internet access. Otherwise, it waits until it has internet access again, and then it sends it. There have been questions as to whether or not Microsoft uses this for non-ethical purposes, but there's no data to be found on that. During a Windows 10 update, I think it was in 2017, might have been 2016, Windows turned on the telemetry feature by default to the maximum without really notifying users, and a lot of people got upset about that. You can turn off the feature, they just didn't tell you that it turned on, which is a little shady. It brings into question whether or not they're using it for ethical purposes. Windows' current stance is that it's only used for data analysis to better improve the user experience. Keyloggers in organizations. They're used for risk management. A lot of times they're able to be used to track any illegal activity, selling of company data, things like that, while using company devices. They're also used to monitor employees. They're able to check how productive you are, and any sites that you go to, things like that. Anything that the company deems not valuable to the company, they're able to track and then take action against you. With that, you lose a lot of employee privacy. Anything you type or go to on an employer-owned device is able to be seen by that employer, including credit card information, things like that. And there are currently no federal laws that provide protections for employees, seeing as it's a company device, so they can kind of do whatever they want with it. It doesn't constitute wiretapping or anything like that, so the federal government doesn't really get involved in that. So in conclusion, keylogging is a fairly neutral act, but it can be used for good and evil. Because hackers and things like that can use it to steal and sniff company or other people's information like social security numbers, credit cards, things like that. But it can also be used for good, such as company protection and troubleshooting. If you're having problems with your keyboard, you can check and see what keys are being logged and stuff like that. See if you have any random keys being clicked while you're not actually doing anything. So how can you protect yourself? Again, checking for physical loggers on the computer itself, and you can scan for most software loggers and only install from trusted software. And just to protect yourself while using a company computer, always assume company computers are logged, and so that you don't enter in any confidential information that you may not want an employer to see. Alright, that's it. Thank you.